All right, folks, we're going to get going right now. Okay. All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's program, Acting and Activism with Minnie Mills. My name is Victor Cha. I'm president of Geopolitics and Foreign Policy at CSIS in Washington, D.C., but I'm here in part because we're very excited to host Minnie Mills, but also because I'm on the board of the Korea Society, and I have different connections to Jonathan Corrado and to Chelsie. But today's program is the final session of the Spring 2025 Kim Koo Professional Series. This series was established in 2015 with the support of the Kim Koo Foundation in Seoul, and it's now in its 10th year. So we want to thank the Kim Koo Foundation very much for this. I'm delighted to welcome the actress Minnie Mills to the Korea Society for a fascinating discussion of her acting journey and how it ties into her activism. Allow me to briefly introduce her. Minnie is best known for her role as Shayla, is that the right pronunciation, Shayla? In the hit Amazon Prime video series, The Summer I Turned Pretty. I don't know if any of you have seen that. And she's now starring as Jen in the action comedy series Obliterated. Is that also on Amazon?
Netflix.
Netflix. Okay, it's on Netflix. So all of you go start watching it. In addition to acting, Minnie is an advocate for North Korean human rights, working closely with the organization Liberty in North Korea, or LINK. She also works under Ambassador Julie Turner at the State Department, where she was appointed a goodwill messenger. I first met Minnie Mills in Washington, D.C. at an event we did at CSIS in cooperation with the State Department and the Deputy Secretary of State and the Ambassador for Human Rights, Kurt Campbell and Julie Turner, where we had an exhibit of artwork by North Korean defectors, as well as a performance, a book display, all sorts of things. It was a very unique event. We've never done anything like that at CSIS, and of course, Minnie Mills was a very important part of that because she was one of the speakers who addressed the audience. And we share a Columbia connection, although I was there before they had computers. But we share a Columbia connection, and I was just very happy to see somebody, with her success and a wonderful at the start of a wonderful career, still willing to take the time out to focus on an issue that not a lot of people pay attention to. And so bringing her stardom to the issue, I think, is really important. It's a very important example to set for others. So we're really, really grateful for that. Today's program is moderated by Korea Society Policy Program Officer Chelsie Alexandre. And this program is live cast for a virtual audience, but our Kim Koo Fellows will have a unique opportunity to interact directly with our speakers in the boardroom after the discussion. So without any further delay, I'm going to turn the floor over to Chelsie and to Minnie Mills. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Dr. Cha, for that very warm introduction. And Minnie, it's an absolute pleasure to have you here at the Korea Society.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. So I just want to jump straight in. I know you've probably answered this question a million times at this point, but I think it would be helpful for those who are unfamiliar with you and your work to just get a quick look into how you got into acting, what keeps you going, and what have you learned so far through your experience?
I got into acting during COVID. It was a lifelong dream of mine. I think ever since I can remember, I've wanted to be an actor. But it didn't always seem like the most practical thing to do. And I was home during COVID, and like most industries, it moved online, and I had the opportunity to audition remotely. And I was lucky enough to book my first job on The Summer I Turned Pretty. And it has just been such an amazing journey. I really, really love what I do. I think I wanted to be an actor because I think that, literature, books, movies, TV, media is the way that we connect to people and learn about people and stories that, are unfamiliar or foreign to us. I think it's how we learn about the world around us. And I just wanted to be able to tell stories that matter to me, to tell stories that make people feel something, whether that's feeling seen through their experience or whether that's feeling empathy for somebody that they might not have thought of before. I think that's, for me, what keeps me going in acting. I recently had the opportunity to do a movie about generational trauma and generational relationships and how, the war that our grandparents experienced affects how their relationships with our parents and our parents' relationships with us, and how do we process that? How do we live through that? How do we continue to heal and move forward? And I think telling those kinds of stories is all I've ever really wanted to do. And so that's kind of what keeps me going.
Absolutely. That is amazing. And congratulations again on your first role as Shayla. Really great show that's in the mainstream. And I love that you're talking about empathy, because I feel like you're championing an issue that requires a lot of empathy. And you've probably noticed in your line of work that not many actors are in the mainstream are like really talking about North Korean human rights. So I'm just curious about how you became aware of the situation and kind of interested in the topic.
I think I first became aware of the situation, growing up. My mom talked a lot about, like where she came from in Korea and also North Korea. And I think she raised me to understand that the people in North Korea are Korean just like us, and they just had a different set of circumstances, and that there was nothing that separated my life and their life other than the fact that my family was lucky enough to be in the South, and that the fact that I get to chase my dreams and become an actor, that I get to sit here in front of you all and talk about something that matters to me freely, that those kind of privileges were afforded because my family was lucky, and that as long as I had something to give, that it was important to give it back. Yeah. And I remember I started working when I was really young. And I remember getting my first paycheck, and I was like 8 years old or something. And, at 8 years old, I was lucky enough to not really need that money. Mm-hmm. And I remember she encouraged me to donate it towards something that mattered to me. And that was when I first got involved with Liberty in North Korea. I remember donating my very first paycheck, and it was such a big moment for me. And I slowly started to get more involved and learn more and realize that, okay, then that little paycheck was what I had to give. And now I have a platform, and my voice is something that I have to give. And I think that that's how, I kind of got the ball rolling. And I really credit my mom for introducing me to that. And
yeah, no. So this is just a complete lifelong journey that you've been on. And I mean, for those who don't follow you yet, and if you haven't already, based on her eloquent answers, you should go over to your Instagram, where you're very clearly using your platform, using the voice that you've had and that you've built. And it's very apparent on your Instagram feed. So I was just wondering, like, when you decided to make that decision, has this been something, the decision to use your platform as a space to kind of champion North Korean issues and raise awareness, was this something that you went into social media doing, or was this more of a process? Could you walk us through your decision to do that?
Yeah, I think when I started acting, I was just so excited to be able to act. I was so excited to live my dream, and I was so happy to go to work every day and do something that I loved. Mm-hmm. But I didn't really think a lot about the fact that the show would come out and that people would watch it and that people would pay attention to it. I didn't know what to expect. It was my first experience. I wasn't sure how the show would be received. And we were very lucky that the show found such success and that so many people, loved it. Mm-hmm. But I think with the social media part of it, I didn't expect so many people to be following me. And I think I felt a lot of anxiety about, that many people listening to what I was saying and watching what I was doing. And for a while, it really was something that I struggled with a lot. It gave me a lot of anxiety. And I think I reached a point where I was like, okay, people are listening to you. People are watching you. Mm-hmm. Why don't you talk about something that you really care about? Yeah. If people are listening to you, why don't you take this opportunity to either, okay, if they don't want to listen to what you're saying, you were stressed about them listening anyways. And if they do, that can make a difference. Yeah. And I think that was when I started to realize, like, okay, I don't have to hide from this. I don't have to hide from social media. Like, I can make it into something that's important for me. And I think that's when I decided to start talking about the North Korean issue.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, how has your audience on social media responded to you kind of incorporating your activism with your acting? Because like you said, people are initially drawn to you because of the show's success, but then how were the reactions to you kind of posting about this alongside, your acting life?
I think it's still something I'm trying to learn how to balance. I know that people have come to my page because they want to know more about me and they want to know more about my life. And as well, and that kind of attention is the attention that's also being brought to the things that I post. I think there's been a lot of support. I think there's been a lot of people who, are learning about this for the first time. I think there's a lot of people who are excited to know more and to get involved and to hear these stories. I think it's also important to be able to come from a place of, I think there's a lot of, very performative activism these days online. And before I, got started with this, I really wanted to understand, okay, how do I come to this from a perspective that's helpful, that's not going to center me, that's going to put attention on these refugees, put attention on their stories, but also how do I do that while protecting their privacy? How do I do that while preserving their autonomy over their own stories, making sure that their stories are being heard the way they want them to, their stories are being told the way they want them to, and they're not being used to garner empathy or sympathy or kind of as a symbol, but more of a conversation about what's happening. And it's also, I have a very young audience, and I think there's a responsibility there to, a lot of these people are hearing about this issue for the first time through me, and to make sure that I'm educated on what I'm speaking about, that I'm informed about what I'm speaking about, that I have resources to direct them towards, okay, how do you learn more about this? How do you become involved? What are different ways you can participate in this? Can you donate? Can you start a chapter at your own school? Can you just talk to your friends about it? And one thing that was very important for me also was just being educated on the issue. I'm a student at Columbia, and I decided to take a cross-register at SIPA, the School of International and Public Affairs, and take a class there with Professor Corrado, who is here today, and the program director here at the Korea Society. And, I think that class was really, really important for me because I had come to this issue from a humanitarian point of view, from getting involved with nonprofit organizations. So if I'm going to talk about this on a bigger stage, I wanted to know more about the history of North Korea, about the landscape of politics and policy in North Korea, about the human rights perspective versus the humanitarian perspective. And, there are different things to navigate when you're speaking on a platform like this versus just getting involved with an issue on the ground. And I think that learning about those things and making sure that I understood the different nuances of this issue was really important to me before I got on a platform, because there's also always going to be people who, discredit or don't believe you. And I wanted to be able to engage in meaningful conversation. I wanted to be able to answer questions. I wanted to be able to feel grounded in that I know what I'm talking about as well, so that when people are saying you're just an actor, what do you know? This is that I could know that I'm coming from a place of, being informed and wanting to educate and inform other people. Yeah. And that was also really important to me.
I mean, you've touched on so many very important points, having such a big voice, being able to kind of influence a younger generation that doesn't understand a topic as nuanced and that requires so much context, I think is really important. And obviously you took Jonathan's class, so that's also a way to just stay informed, stick to the facts of the issue. But I was wondering too, as you probably know in your experience, there's not much information coming out of North Korea these days. And I think most North Korea watchers are also, fighting to get more context and information coming out of North Korea. So I'm wondering what your tips are for trying to keep this topic relevant when the media cycle is just so fast. People can't keep interest, but there's nothing new coming out that you can really talk about. What are your ways of navigating that kind of situation?
I think one of my biggest goals when I was starting to talk about North Korea on my platform was, I think my goal was, okay, if one more person gets interested in this and does research on this, or one more person starts talking to their friends or their community about this issue, or like, have you heard about this? And I think having those conversations is where I started in, my activism and my advocacy. And I think it's so easy, especially as younger people, to feel powerless against, large scale issues like this. You see the events going on in the world and you think, okay, but I'm just some kid, and like, what can I even do about this? And to come from a place of like, your voice matters. You exist within these institutions. You have power within them. And there are ways to like make yourself heard. And I think the place where everyone starts is having conversations about it.
Yeah.
And making sure that we're talking about these things. And not only, I think so much of the media attention around North Korea is so negative, is also so focused on nuclear weapons and Kim Jong-un. And I think having conversations that are centering the people of North Korea about the reality of their situation. There are over 26 million people living under one of the worst regimes in the globe, and nobody's talking about the people living there and their realities and what their lives are like.
Yeah.
And I think just continuing to have these conversations and continuing to talk about them and inform people who, might not be talking about it. I think that's a huge thing that people can do.
No, absolutely. And obviously you're fighting very loudly and clearly online. And like you said, you're having conversations offline. I think Dr. Cha mentioned this, but you were also appointed a Goodwill Ambassador by the U.S. State Department. And you've partnered with organizations like Link, as he mentioned, interviewing defectors and sharing their stories. And so I was wondering if you could share any interactions or maybe friendships that you've had with North Korean defectors since doing this work, kind of anything that's special, treasured, or even a moment where your point of view has changed on what's going on, or like your eyes have been open to something that most people haven't even thought of or considered. So just kind of your interactions with defectors, if you can share a story about that.
I think I've been very lucky to be able to meet and get to know a lot of North Korean refugees from a young age. And I think, when I was younger and I first got involved with the issue, I remember hearing a lot of and learning a lot about these really horrific and difficult experiences that a lot of people have taken to escape North Korea and the circumstances within North Korea. And those stories are really, really impactful. But also, I think what's almost more important to me as I started to make friends and actually hear people's stories from their own mouths is, I think a lot of these North Korean people, they're so proud of their home and they have so much hope for what it can be. And they have, despite the experiences that they might have encountered escaping or living within and the things that they've endured at the hands of their own government, they still love their home and they still hope to see their fellow North Koreans free, and they still have belief that that's a possibility, and they want. I'll avoid saying names to protect their privacy, but I met a girl over this past summer, and she created a website, like a database where people can try to find their loved ones, whether they be deceased, or whether they have escaped, or whether they're still in North Korea. It's kind of like a forum where people can communicate whatever they've heard, and then people can put out information asking for people to respond. And it's really inspired another girl that I met when I was much, much younger. She started a YouTube channel teaching people how to cook traditional North Korean meals, and seeing people share this love for their home and for their people and celebrating their own joys and their own wins, like another girl I met going to nursing school. And, I think hearing those stories just reinforce what my mom taught me when I was younger. These are people. They're people like us with hopes and dreams. And I think that often, when you look at an issue and you look at the egregious violation of human rights, it feels so far away. It feels so far away from your own life, from your own experience. And I think it's so important to, acknowledge, yes, the violations that are occurring, the horrible state of human rights within North Korea, and to continue to keep that at attention and not let that fall from the media, from people's perspectives, but also to celebrate, the joys and the resilience and the wins of the North Korean people. And I think that's how we connect to people. We connect through food, we connect through stories, we connect through our family and our friends and our loved ones. Yeah. And I think that that's something that I've really wanted to put at the forefront of my representation. I want people to meet and see these refugees as human beings like them, as human beings who, yes, are incredibly resilient and who've gone through something difficult, but also who still have a love for their country, and, to be able to see North Korea through their eyes instead of the eyes of the media that sometimes, there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of hatred in that depiction. And I think just recognizing the humanity is super, super important.
I mean, you're right. People don't know much of what's going on either, so it's very easy to be scared, be confused, what's going on. And it sounds like you've acquired like a very comprehensive understanding of North Korea, what's going on there, whether it's through the classroom or through meeting people directly. And I was wondering if you could talk a bit about how you incorporate these learnings, very diversified, into your acting career. I'm curious if this ever comes up with your fellow actors. What are their reactions to realizing, okay, Minnie's not only a student, she's not only an actress, but she's also championing this? What do those conversations look like, and how do you kind of weave that into your experience as an actor?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, as I mentioned, having conversations is so important. I think that, before I talked about this on a large scale, I talked about this with my friends, I talked about this with my colleagues, I talked about this with anyone who would listen, and I was really surprised by how many people cared to listen, how many people were like, even older people came up to me and were like, oh, I didn't know that, or, and wanted to participate in a conversation with me, wanted to learn more. I think one experience that really comes to mind is when I was shooting the Netflix show I was just on. I had been, talking about North Korea on social media, and the actor who played my dad messaged me, and he said, my father was actually a North Korean refugee, but I don't really know anything about where he came from. And I would love to learn more. I would love to get involved. I would love to learn more about the place my dad came from, the people who are and how to help the people who are escaping now, the people who are on journeys like he was. Mm-hmm. And that meant so much to me, because I think a lot of the time I feel like I'm talking and maybe I'm talking to people who don't care. Maybe I'm talking to people who wish that I would talk less, but to be able to, and I had a conversation with him about, my experience meeting people from North Korea, my experience working with and on this issue, with them and on this issue. And it was a real moment of connection, and a real moment that, like, he had been looking for a lot of his life too, and he was really, really interested and passionate about getting involved and learning more about his own history, and I think that meant so much to me.
And it's amazing that he could just go over to you, form that connection, and get directed to those resources. And so, I mean, I guess for people, like you mentioned earlier, who might feel like they don't have as much power, especially the younger generation, which probably makes up most of your audience, what kind of tools should the next generation try to leverage in their activism? What's out there other than just social media?
Absolutely. I think that, there's a lot of grassroots work being done at high schools and colleges. There's like Liberty in North Korea has, you can create chapters at your own college. There's ways to get involved. I think also, you know, like I hope to share more like book lists and media of ways that you can learn more about this issue from people who are telling their own stories. Like I love to platform other people's stories, but I think hearing people's stories like from their own perspective is really important. I think that, as I mentioned, continuing conversations, like talking about it with your friends and people who might not understand or know. And I think that there's also like there's a lot of really great organizations that do a lot of really great work, and I think just staying informed and talking about it, and obviously donations and working with these organizations are always a great possibility, but you can get in touch with these organizations if you don't have the money and be like, what do you need? Because I think there's a big need for people who are willing to help and willing to participate and who just care. And there's always like they always need more people, and then they always like, I think, young voices too. I think because this is an issue that is largely talked about in an older generation of people who are more familiar with the war, with its consequences. But I think that audience also looks at this issue and has learned about this issue with a lot of bias of, the hardships of that time and the sacrifices that were made, and, the coloring of all of nuclear weapons and the Cold War and Kim Jong-il and Kim Jong-un. And I think that what this younger generation presents with so many people who are so new to this issue is that instead of coming at North Korea from that lens, they can understand what's happening in North Korea and learn about it from the lens of human rights and the humanity and the people inside North Korea. And they can come at it from a lens of, rather than fear, hope and compassion.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, this issue is so intractable, though, as you mentioned. The older generation has been talking about this. Not much has changed in the last few decades. And it's important for the younger generation to speak out about this. And we mentioned trying to keep it relevant in the media and things like that. But it seems like not much is changing or has changed, or the situation's getting worse. So with that context in mind, what keeps you motivated in continuing to champion this throughout? Despite the fact that it doesn't seem like much has moved in a positive direction.
I agree that I think, from the landscape can look a little bleak, and especially with the situation in our country right now. But I think what keeps me hopeful is really the North Korean people. I think, as I said, despite all of the hardships that they've had to endure and the sacrifices they've made, they still look, and their experiences within the country and escaping from it and whatever drove them to have to leave their home, they still hope to return to a free North Korea. They still hope to reunite with their families. They still hope to see the people that are still there free. They still work tirelessly to talk about these issues. They continue to put them, a lot of the people I've met continue to put themselves at risk, continue to put themselves in harm's way because they believe in a better North Korea. They believe in a free North Korea. And I used to work providing education in refugee camps, and I think I've always really believed that given the proper support, given the proper resources, these refugees understand their country and understand the issues within them intimately and in a way that we, even experts don't know, and even experts can't understand. And I think given the tools and given the support, they can be the key to really making movements in these issues if we let them, to really making real change. And I think seeing their hope and their passion for continuing to push for something, and in spite of adversity, in spite of what looked probably much more bleak times than the ones we're facing. I think that's what keeps me going, and that's what keeps me hopeful, and that's what keeps me passionate.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a really great point of having refugee-centered kind of narratives and passion and motivation, and using your platform as a way to be the mouthpiece to that. I think is really important. That's a really great point as well. What would you like? I'll pivot over to what people here can do who aren't North Korean refugees. They're just learning about the issue. They just watched The Summer I Turned Pretty, and they love Shayla, and they love watching you. They enjoy watching you on the big screen. What would you want your fans to know about North Korea that they wouldn't get from anywhere else? And how would you recommend that they go? I mean, you've mentioned like volunteering. They're consuming content and then going straight to action. Any advice for, and this could be for any issue as well, how you can kind of move from this passive consumptive state to doing the work that needs to be done?
I think that making sure, you're coming from a place where obviously first and foremost you're safe, and you're not I think a lot of my audience is really young. I think that, the ways that I first got involved is you talk about an issue and you learn more about an issue, and learning about the ways in which your community either contributes or plays a role in it. I think that looking at your local representatives is somewhere that I started when I was really young, and when I was looking into not only the North Korean issue, but I had started talking a lot about in my own life and doing a lot of research about the Japanese occupation and the issue of comfort women. And I think the first ways that I learned how to get involved was I was like, okay, I've consumed so much information about it. I've talked and I've talked and I've talked. Who are the other people who are talking about this? Who are the other people who are interested in this? Who are the bigger actors in this? And connecting to people within your community who have talked about this or have put a platform on this, communicating with them, and seeing okay, how do I interact with what you're doing? And starting to build a network of people who care, starting to find other students who are passionate about this and trying to get involved, and building yourself a community that you can use to kind of push forth the efforts that you care about. And I think building a community is also really big in being able to do bigger things, whether that be donation efforts, or whether that be creating a chapter at your own school that talks about this and disseminates this information to other students. Thinking about now that you've had this information, what are the ways that you wish that you were informed about it? How can you do that for your classmates? How can you expand your network and move forward and move on to bigger things with it? I met some really great fellows when I was at CSIS who had heard about this online and started a Liberty in North Korea chapter at their own school, and they continued to talk about it until they had joined the trilateral engagements, and they were continuing to post and share about it as well. And I think, you don't have to have a super large platform to start a conversation.
Oh, that is amazing. Yeah. And I think what you're saying about just the network effects of just being loud, being informed as well, not loudly wrong, is very important. And building that community, I think, also helps with motivation. And just staying active in this. And I guess I just want to close out by asking, what is next for you? Whether that's in school or with acting, your activism, anything that's coming up for you.
I think in school, I feel like I'm just trying to continue to educate myself on how best to, not only what's happening in North Korea, but how best to use my platform. I'm lucky. I'm taking a social media and human rights class, which has been really interesting, and I'm really trying to build out how do we move forward in this, especially in this climate? What are the real actions that I can take? I'm auditioning, and hopefully there's some fun. I have a short and a film down the line that hopefully will come out this year or next year, and I really hope to just continue to do this advocacy work, hopefully continue to work with Liberty in North Korea and organizations like them, and continue to meet and talk to and spotlight refugees and their stories, and talk more about what's going on in North Korea, and hopefully just keep this at the forefront of people's minds when there's a lot going on in the world. And I think hope is a rare commodity, and continuing to hopefully instill that and live by that.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for all the work that you do. You know, the Korea Society is always pushing for North Korean human rights, and to have someone from the next generation also championing that is very, very inspiring and gives us a lot of hope. So I would like to invite everyone to join me in thanking you for this wonderful conversation. All right.